Nightmare Narrative presents The Lucienne Twins. Written in 2016 by award-winning Redditor Leo da Vinci on the subreddit No Sleep. There are 3 parts to this story, and so we will begin with part 1. So sit back, relax, turn off the lights, and we will begin soon. I will never forget the Lucienne twins. Even after 10 years, they are still fresh in my memory. Too fresh. It was my first year of teaching when they were in my class. My fresh college diploma was framed on my desk, and I had placed a signed picture of my favorite professor, who's now deceased, on the wall behind me. In cursive, it read, "To Mary, my brightest, that you may teach the world." I watched over my kindergarten class as if they were my own children. But the Lucienne twins were my favorite. There was Abigail, the blonde one with a minuscule nose, and Bridget, shorter with brunette hair. "Miss Mary," Abigail would start, tugging on my dress before Bridget continued. "We were wondering," Abigail would take over, "if we could go to the sticker box." Bridget would now speak, "And take a star?" And of course, there was no way I could say no to that couple. They were irresistible, from their broken sentences to the heart-shaped lockets they wore that were embossed with their names. I could never imagine something happening to them. But fate follows no rules, and something did. Word about the car crash spread around the school faster than the ambulance could reach the hospital. It had been in an intersection where a pickup truck had slammed into the side of their compact car on their Friday morning commute. The driver had still been drunk from the night before. The gas tank was immediately ruptured, spewing the right side of the car with fuel, and flames licked up through the back seat. Bridget was strapped into a car seat above them, and rumor was that Abigail watched her twin burn alive. When the firemen freed Abigail, she threw herself onto the still smoldering bones of Bridget, and her sister's red-hot locket branded itself into her earlobe. The body of her single mother survived, but the toll of the lost daughter sickened her soul. Abigail returned to class 2 weeks later. The hair on the right side of her head was singed, and steadily grew back, though the color was darker. A doctor's inspection revealed nothing else wrong with her, except a deafness in her right ear. Hushed voices in the school hallways whispered her eardrum imploded by the sheer loudness of her sister's dying screams. But most unnerving was her sister's name, scarred into the lobe of her deaf ear, and surrounded by the outline of a heart-shaped locket. From then on, no student would sit on the right side of Abigail, and I had to rearrange the seating charts to place her next to the wall. Abigail seemed content there in an island of isolation. Before her sister died, they rarely conversed with the other students, and now was no different. In social time, I would hear Abigail talking to the wall in incoherent sentences. "Abigail, honey, what are you saying?" I asked a week after she'd returned. "Oh, Miss Mary," she said, "I'm—" Then she would pause, waiting. "And then we thought—" Another pause. Silence. "And we can't we?" "Sure you can, honey," I replied, though the exchange made my hair stand on end. She smiled again and cocked her right ear, the deaf one, to the wall, pausing again, then speaking. "She said yes!" Then the gibberish continued and the closing bell rang. It wasn't until I drove halfway home that I realized the gaps in Abigail's conversation were where Bridget should be speaking. Months passed, and Abigail became even more of an outcast in the class. The kindergartners came to forget the disaster, and some students even began bullying Abigail. I revised the seating chart again, and moved her close to my desk. "Miss Mary," clamored Abigail one day, pulling my dress. She stumbled and I reached to catch her, but she fell against my professor's portrait on the wall, shattering the protective glass. She picked up the remains, the glass biting deep into her soft palms. She didn't even notice. "I'm sorry, Miss Mary," she said, and her voice changed tenor. "We didn't mean to break." Again, a pitch change. "Your picture." I stopped. It was her first complete sentence since the crash. "It's okay," I said, holding her. Blood from her hands dripped onto me, but it felt cold, and I rushed to bandage it. "I'm sure you'll teach the world one day, Miss Mary," she said, her voice continuing the inflections. My heart froze as I read the note on the portrait for the 1000th time. Abigail couldn't read cursive. "How did you know that?" I asked. "Bridget told me. She talks to me now," she said, curling her streak of darker hair around her finger. "That's not all she tells me. She tells me terrible things sometimes, and I can't stop hearing her." Then she started crying, and I noticed the glass embedded deep into her hands. "She never stops!" Her voice elevated to a yell. When I took the picture back, her sentences became broken again, and I moved her on the seating chart away from my desk. Over time, the other students realized Abigail's reaction to old objects. They'd bring her in things that they found in the attic, artifacts her grandparents owned, and watched as she cocked her right ear, and her sentences became whole or broken when she held them. It became a game to them, listening to the stories she made up. But the effect took an obvious toll on her, and she soon started wearing gloves, even in the dead heat of summer. But one boy, larger than the others, a brute known for his bullying, liked the look on Abigail's face as they pushed artifacts into her squirming palms. He was the quickest to see the fear that she felt when they once gave her an old bullet shell, and ran home afterwards to find an old box in his basement his parents forbade him to open. Inside was his great-grandfather's Nazi uniform, a warden at a concentration camp, and he twisted off one of the buttons. The next day, he found Abigail on the playground and pinned her against the chain-link fence. He ripped the gloves off and forced the button into her hand, tightly closing her fingers around it. When she began screaming, he only laughed and closed the fist tighter. I reached them too late. When I pulled the boy off her, she was sobbing uncontrollably, both her hands locked into fists. She dropped the button like it was searing hot, but refused to open the other fist until the paramedics arrived and knocked her out with anesthesia. Only then could they pull her severed right ear out, torn off by her bloody fingernails, with Bridget still written on the lobe. But most terrifying of all was when she screamed. I could hear 2 voices screaming. That is the end of part 1. We will begin part 2 momentarily. I wish I could say that was the last I had ever heard of the Lucienne twins. I wish Abigail's story ended with the month she spent at the psychiatrist's office after the incident. But wishes rarely come true, and this was no exception. Abigail never came back to school that year. A teacher that was her family friend gossiped with me over a cup of coffee in the break room 3 weeks later, filling in the details that had kept me awake deep into the night. She's staying at home until this whole thing blows over. 3 times a week she goes to counseling, though she won't talk to anyone, and only eats if you put 2 plates in front of her. If you ask me, this was an accident waiting to happen. Poor thing. Her grandfather was just diagnosed with terminal cancer now too, and the doctors were able to sew the ear back on. Can you believe that? Apparently you can barely even tell it came off. Miraculous. Miraculous. I'm not sure if that was the appropriate word, or if they should have sewn it back. At the end of the school year, the school board informed me that I would be moving to another school, a smaller institution for brighter children. I accepted, not because the pay was better, but because I knew it was their kind of way to fire me. I could hear their whispers, that I was the one who made the freak crack. So I packed away my things and was admitted into Carey School for the Gifted. There were no current openings for kindergarten teachers, so I taught second grade. My first year went by smoothly, and I received a small bonus at the end for my students' high test scores. When I returned from the summer to start my second year, 19 out of the 20 desks were filled by young children, their fresh crowns tucked away in pencil bags that smelled like Walmart. I smiled at them and introduced myself, writing my name on the board as I talked. "Hello, class. My name is Mary Watkins, and I'll be your new second grade." Behind me, the classroom door opened, and I heard the footsteps of 2 students enter. The smile froze on my lips, and my marker jumped across the board as I heard her voice. "Hi, Miss Mary." I turned. Abigail stood alone in the center of the room. Her silver locket dangled from her neck. Bridget was still burned into her right ear, which looked as if it had never been missing. "We missed you." And maybe it was the lighting, but I could have sworn I saw 2 shadows. I sat Abigail near the windows. The sunlight calmed her, and she spent most of her time staring up into the clouds. Despite this, she still managed to test better than anyone else in the class. Once realizing she was not paying attention, I called upon her for a simple arithmetic problem. "Abigail, what's 2 times 4? She continued to stare off, her eyes glassy. The rest of the class twisted in their chairs to watch. "Abigail," I repeated, my high heels clicking against the tiles as I walked over to her. Still, no response. I waved a hand in front of her face, flexing my fingers, then touched her face. Abigail threw her head back and gasped, drawing in a breath so deep it was as if she had been held underwater. Her desk rocked from the momentum, and I held it down, forcing my hands over the chilled wood. She thrashed, looking from left to right wildly. "Abigail, honey, I'm here!" I shouted, and her eyes met mine. Tears spilled outwards, and she embraced me, her nails digging through my dress into my shoulder. "We're sorry, Miss Mary. We're so sorry." "Shh, shh, shh, shh. It's okay, Abigail. Everything's going to be okay." "It was Bridget. She took me somewhere, and we couldn't find our way back. It was dark and cold." She shivered. I suppressed my own shudder. "You're here now. You're back." She sighed, and I released her. The recess bell rang, and the rest of the class hurried out, carrying lunchboxes away with questions they were too young to know the answer to. Questions that I, at 27, am still too young to know the answer to. "Miss Mary," she said when my back was turned, "Bridget says the answer is 8. Since Abigail had returned, her speech had greatly improved. No longer were there intermittent pauses where Bridget used to speak, but the tenor of her voice continued to change at those intervals. It wasn't until 4 weeks into the semester that I realized why. In her front pocket, Abigail always carried a fountain pen. It was gray, the color of the clouds she watched outside the window, and came to a sharp point at one end. "I like your pen, Abigail," I said one day, and she beamed, thrusting her pocket out like a badge of honor. "Thanks, Miss Mary. My grandfather gave it to me. He writes storybooks. He wrote us once, me and Bridget, about how we'd always be together. It had our lockets on the cover." "Did he now? Well, that was sweet of him. I'm sure he's a nice man. I love him more than anything else in the world. It's just sad he can't visit anymore." "Why's that, Abigail?" "He's in the hospital, Miss Mary." Bridget says she keeps him safe. And Daddy says everything is going to be all right. I'm sure it will be, I said, and left the discussion. I forgot about it until one day Abigail misplaced her pen. Miss Mary. She tugged at my dress, her hand jerking urgently. I had been teaching the class cursive, but she walked up to the board like nothing was happening. We can't find... Pause. But we just had it. Pause. My pen. We need your help. My hairs raised. The come-and-go speech pattern was back again. Abigail, sit back down. I'll help you after the lesson. No! She shouted, stamping her foot. No! We need... Pause. Or else... Pause. We'll die! It would be fruitless trying to continue the lesson, so I helped her search. With every minute, she grew more frantic, throwing over rugs and backpacks in her search. When she was on the verge of tears, I found it underneath one of the bookshelves. She sighed. Thank you, Miss Mary. We're better now. There was still time. No pauses now, just inflections again. The two girls seated behind her snickered. One was Natalie, a redhead with freckles peppered across her face, and the other was Jane, whose shoes were always shiny and school supplies always new. The week before, I had caught them poking Abigail during class, much to her distress. I continued my lesson and instructed the students to write a sentence of their choice in cursive. Abigail took the cap off her pen and for the first time used it to write an assignment. She took her time, eyes furrowed in concentration as she worked. The rest of the students had left when she finished. She looked it over carefully, making adjustments for a full 10 minutes before she turned it in. I let her work even after the transpired events. I had grown to love Abigail, and her dedication made me proud. I wanted to see what her handwriting would produce. You worked a long time on that, Abigail, I said as she walked up to my desk. I wanted it to be perfect, Miss Mary. This pen writes so beautifully. I love the ink. It's the most pretty blue. And it sparkles in the light. It certainly is. Go home now, Abigail. Your family will be waiting. The sheet was blank. There was no blue ink. She picked up her bags and headed out the door. She could walk home from school, and I hadn't seen her parents drive her here in over a week. When she was gone, I looked at her paper. I held it up to the light and could see the scratches the out-of-ink pen had made against the lines. It said, Abigail belongs to me. Just before lunch the next day, Abigail's pen went missing again. We searched for 15 minutes, and each passing second her panic became more evident. It wasn't under the bookshelf, or under the rug, or in her backpack, whose contents she had strewn across the floor in rage. She shook, wrapping her hands around her face and pulling her hair. Behind her, I saw Natalie and Jane sharing a knowing look. A flash of gray gleamed from Natalie's pocket. She's such a baby. Baby, 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 taunted Natalie as I took the pen from her. The shrieks had already begun by the time I brought it to Abigail. She grasped it, her knuckles bone white, and for a moment all was silent. It's too late. He's gone, she whispered and looked me dead in the eyes. He's gone. Then she screamed so loud that I had to cover my ears and feared the windows would rupture. Baby, shouted Natalie, putting her hands on Abigail's desk. Her voice was drowned out. Abigail threw the pen as hard as she could at the board. It ricocheted, bouncing at an impossible angle, flying up above my head and slamming point first deep into Abigail's desk, straight through Natalie's right hand and pinning it to the wood. It was so embedded that I couldn't remove it, and Natalie had to wait the 15 minutes for the paramedics to arrive until she could move. They rushed her to the hospital, and the school board suspended Abigail for 2 weeks. She spent it in Pennsylvania, at her grandfather's funeral. The day of the accident, he had died, and the doctor marked the time of death in thick blue ink at 11:44 a.m. That morning, I had returned the one-sentence assignment, and Natalie's blood now stained Abigail's paper. On the way to throw it out, I stopped, something catching my eye. Under the blood, sparkly blue writing crossed the once blank sheet. Abigail belongs to me. That is the end of part 2. Please like this video if you have enjoyed it so far, and subscribe to this channel, Nightmare Narrative, for more scary stories. Also, comment below what you thought. That helps me out quite a bit. And now, the final part of the Lucienne twins. The most disturbing thing about Abigail wasn't her queer tendencies or her morbid past. It was her innocence. It was that she didn't know that anything was wrong with her life. The end of the year was near. The children grew antsy in their seats as old snow turned to spring blossoms, and final parent-teacher conferences were approaching. I moved Natalie and Jane to the other side of the classroom, but it didn't seem to matter. They avoided Abigail now. Everyone did. She was quieter than she used to be, though she still held half conversations with the wall during social time, and the way she dressed had changed sometimes. Her clothes were too small, and sometimes they matched in ways that just seemed odd, though the pen in her pocket stayed constant. Her hair was different, too. She began to wear it in braids and other more complicated styles. I couldn't help but notice that the streak of brown in her blonde hair had grown. "Abigail, honey, I don't think those clothes fit you just right," I said one day. She wore a yellow button-up shirt, but it was so tight that the buttons looked as if they were about to pop off. "See, I told you she wouldn't like it. I wanted to wear the blue one," she said, twitching her right ear. "It looks fine, honey. I just think you might want to wear one that is bigger." "But Bridget said this was her favorite shirt, and I should wear it today because it makes me look pretty." My skin began to crawl. That was when I first realized that she still wore Bridget's clothes, which had not changed since kindergarten. I would have to bring this up at the parent-teacher conference along with many, many other things. On Wednesdays, it was my turn to patrol the lunchroom while the students ate. Abigail sat alone on the corner of one of the long tables, her lunchbox zipped open in front of her and its innards strewn around the table. She had set the seat beside her as well, placing portions of food on the table in front of it. She took a bite of a sandwich and something multicolored fell out onto the floor. It was a gummy worm, half green and half orange. "What's that you're eating, Abigail?" I asked, poking around the rest of her lunchbox, finding a few candy bars, a baggie of sugary cereal that my own parents wouldn't let me eat, and a bottle of chocolate milk. "Lunch, Miss Mary. We made our own recipe." "Your own? Do you pack your own lunch, Abigail? What does your mother say about gummy worm sandwiches?" "We pack it every day," she said proudly. "And Mommy doesn't like it, but I don't really listen to Mommy anymore." "Abigail, you need to listen to your mother. I'll buy you hot lunch today." "What about Bridget?" "She can have extra of your special lunch." I clenched my teeth as I watched her eat. What type of parent lets their child eat junk every day? And dress in clothes that obviously didn't fit? Especially since it was her only daughter still left alive. On Parent-Teacher Day, Abigail's mother and I will be having a long talk. Next Wednesday, I caught Abigail eating gummy worms again. Now, I bought her lunch every day, and every day she packed lunch for Bridget. Abigail's mother had the 7:30 p.m. time slot on Parent-Teacher Day. It was my last conference, and I had scheduled it late so that I could spend some extra time with her. I watched the analog clock in the corner. Right now, it was 7:29, but parents often showed up late to meetings. 5 minutes passed, then 10, then 30. I shook with anger when I got up from my desk. The negligence of Abigail's mother was appalling. Opening up the directory I kept in my drawer, I ripped out Abigail's contact information. Like it or not, her mother would be having the conference. The drive was short, about 5 minutes, and I pulled into Abigail's driveway. Her house was on top of a small hill, higher than any of the others around it, and a dead oak tree stood in one corner. The grass was high and uncut, while the flowers under the porch were wilting. I rang the doorbell twice and waited. I heard Abigail thumping down the stairs, and a moment later the blinds flickered open to reveal her eyes. "Miss Mary, come in," she said, opening the door wide. "Hello, Abigail. Is your mother home? She missed her parent-teacher conference." "Oh, yes, Miss Mary. She said she didn't feel like going out tonight." I clenched my teeth again and struggled to keep my voice even. "Did she now? Can you take me to her?" "Of course," she said, and whipped around, leading me to the kitchen. My nose wrinkled. Whatever Abigail's mother had cooked for dinner smelled disgusting. We turned the corner, and I saw her seated at the kitchen table. Her back was towards me, and I felt my anger surge. "I have every right to report you to Children's Services. If you continue treating your daughter like this, then I'll have no choice," I scolded, sitting in the chair next to her and turning to face her. The smell wasn't dinner. The smell was Abigail's dead mother. What was left of the skin on her face was taut, and much of her hair had fallen out, littering the floor around her. In front of her was a moldy cup and an empty bottle of prescription sleeping pills. I froze, and Abigail embraced her mother, knocking one of her hands off the table to fall motionless at her side. I stood, backing away slowly. There was a video recorder plugged in on the counter, and its flashing red light blinked at me. "Abigail, honey, how long has your mother been like this?" I asked, carefully choosing my words. "Like what, Miss Mary?" "Here, at this table." "No, dead. How long has she been dead?" my thoughts screamed. "Oh, I don't know. Mommy still gets up every once in a while, but she stays in the kitchen a lot more than she used to. And she's been sitting at my seat during dinner." She pouted, crossing her arms across her chest. A fly buzzed around her mother's head, but she didn't notice. She was busy holding her mother's shriveled hand. "Abigail, how about you give me a few minutes alone with your mother? Go watch the TV in the other room." "Okay, Miss Mary." She left, and I waited until I saw the blue-green glow of the television before flipping open the video recorder. In the corner, the last recorded date flashed, and I counted back the days. 37. My God, I thought, and pressed play. The screen flickered to life, and Abigail's mother's face materialized. Her eyes were puffy, and tear tracks from her mascara streaked down her face. I recognized Bridget's old locket in her hand. "I can't do it anymore," she said into the camera. "It's too much. I'd be able to take it without my dad's death or the things that are happening. I think I'm going crazy. But Abigail, something's happening to Abigail. Something's wrong, and I can't live to see it happen." "Abigail!" she called, and Abigail came into the picture. Her mother held 2 cups. "Abigail, I made you some juice. Would you drink it with me?" "But Mommy, Bridget wants a glass too." "Of course she does." And I saw fear cross her face. "Here, drink up." "Are you okay, Mommy?" "Yes, everything is fine. Drink all of it. I put some vitamins in there. Bridget says this is hers. Just drink it." And at that moment, Abigail's voice changed, and the recorder's lighting changed. Maybe it was the lighting, but Abigail's hair looked darker than before. "Okay, Mommy." I saw her drink it and heard the empty cup hit the table. "Where's mine?" she asked. "You just drank it," murmured her mother. Her own medicine was starting to take effect. "No, Bridget drank that one. She said it was the sweetest drink she's ever had. I want one too." But her mother was already asleep. Abigail failed to notice, and for the next 15 minutes upheld conversation with her mother. Then the recorder's lighting dimmed. Her voice changed, and she looked straight into the camera. "Mommy is with me now." She smiled as the recording expired. This explained the mismatched clothes and the lunches. "Abigail," I said, calling her back from the other room. "What happened to you the night your mother brought you juice? Did you get sick off of it?" "No, Miss Mary, she never gave me any juice." "What have you been eating, Abigail? Who's been doing your laundry?" "Bridget does everything now. Mommy helps sometimes, and they braid my hair." I shivered. The styles she used were too complicated for her to do alone. "Come, Abigail, you're staying with me tonight." "Is that okay, Mommy?" she said, cocking her ear. "All right, if you say so. I'll be home before dinner tomorrow." Maybe the pills had expired. Maybe her mother forgot to spike her glass. The possibilities ran through my mind as we left behind her house, with the dead oak, the dead flowers, and the dead mother. But in my heart, I could feel what had transpired. And though it terrified me, I knew what I had to do next. I had to adopt Abigail.